Hello everyone, thanks for stopping by and checking out my channel. Now for today's video, I'm going to be doing a little bit of skill testing. There's this absolutely insane build I've been working on for the past week, and I think I've finally gotten it to the point where I'm really happy with it. This build essentially makes it so you can never die by constantly siphoning health, and you never run out of spirit, so you can infinitely spam your abilities doing a ton of damage. But before we get into the build, I just wanted to say that this video is sponsored by Blizzard and Diablo 4. So a huge thanks to them for sponsoring today's video. Alright, so getting into the build, first I want to go over some of the gear pieces I have equipped because this is what essentially makes the build. I've been testing out a number of different aspects for this build for the past week. There has been a lot of trial and error, so I've finally gotten this build to the point where I have all of the aspects that I want. I just don't have the individual like armor stats, so there's still a lot of room for improvement for this build, but I wanted to create a build that was good from mid-game cleared through end-game. I've seen a lot of build guides on YouTube where people are just level 100 already and they show you like the end product. So this is a build that you can get fairly early on. You don't have to be maxed out to get this to work. And this build will punch up a lot higher than your current level. I was able to go into a nightmare dungeon and easily kill enemies that were level 89 to 90, and I was only level 76. So this build does an absolutely insane amount of damage. So getting into the gear for the helmet, I have the unique helmet, the Tempest Roar. And the reason we have this equipped is because your base storm skills are now also werewolf skills. So any storm skill that we cast is also going to count as a werewolf skill. So that is really important to this build. And then for the chest piece, we went with the Mad Wolf's Glee, which is a unique chest piece for the Druid. And this makes it so that your werewolf form is now your true form, and you gain +2 ranks to all werewolf skills. This is also very essential to our build. Then for the gloves, I put the aspect on it where the hurricane damage is increased by 14% for each second. This isn't really essential to the build, that's just a nice little bonus to damage that I put on it. Then for the pants, I went with the imprint where you gain 0.50% of increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, stacking up to 50%. So this is just a good way to get myself some extra armor when I'm dealing a ton of damage. So for the boots, this part is really important because I went with the aspect where while Hurricane is active, you gain +2 ranks to your shape-shifting skills. And since we're wearing this helmet, that turns all of our storm skills into shape-shifting skills, which means every time we activate Hurricane, it's going to give a +2 rank to our storm skills. So my Lightning Storm is going to go from 11 to 13. And as you can see, it already does 8,000 to 10,000 damage. And when I buff it up with Hurricane, it makes it even stronger. Then for the weapon isn't too important. I just picked whatever had the most damage output that I had at the time, and then I upgraded it. But what is important is this aspect. This aspect is absolutely broken when you put it on a two-handed weapon. But you want to go with the aspect that makes it so your Grizzly Rage now shapeshifts you into a Direwolf. And as a Direwolf, you gain 48% movement speed instead of damage reduction, and a 96% spirit cost reduction bonus. In addition, kills heal you for 10% of your maximum life. So this isn't even the best roll you can possibly get. So if you get an aspect that has a perfect roll and you put this on a two-handed weapon, that will give you a 100% spirit cost reduction bonus when you're in your Grizzly Rage, which is just absolutely broken, and that's what makes this entire build overpowered. Then for the amulet, I just went with any amulet, but I imprinted it with Lightning Storm Critical Strike, spawn 3 dancing bolts that seek enemies in an area, dealing 2,555 lightning damage. Now obviously you can get a better roll than the one I have. I just went with this for testing purposes. Now there's a couple of different lightning aspects. I've tested every single one of them, but I found that this aspect, the one that spawns the 3 dancing bolts, is the most powerful. It just does a crap ton of damage, especially if there's a large group of enemies. Like I said, I've tested all of the different lightning abilities, and this is just the one that I found that works the best for me. Then for the ring, I went with the imprint, where you deal 9% increased damage for each second you stand still, up to 30%. So if you get a perfect roll on this, if you stand still for 3 seconds, you're going to do 30% more damage. And since we're going to be focusing this build around the Lightning Storm ability, and we're going to be standing still every time you cast Lightning Storm, that 30% extra damage is a huge boost. Then for the final ring, this one's also super important. The duration of Grizzly Rage is increased by 5 seconds. In addition, critical strikes while Grizzly Rage is active increase your critical strike damage by 10% for the duration. So you get 5 additional seconds of Grizzly Rage, and every second that Grizzly Rage is active increases your damage by 10%. And this ring actually stacks with the weapon where Grizzly Rage shapes you into a dire werewolf. These two combined is what really makes this build overpowered. Alright, so let's go over the skill tree real quick. A lot of these are bumped up because of the armor pieces that I'm wearing, so don't pay too much attention to the blue ones. These are just some extras. Okay, so for the basic, I went with the Earth Spike because it's one of the fastest basics that you can get off, and it has some range to it. So I just put 1 point into Earth Spike, and then I put a second point into the Enhanced Earth Spike, where Earth Spike has a 10% chance to stun them for 2.5 seconds. So I just put 2 points into the basic skill tree. Moving on to the second skill tree, I bumped up Lightning Storm as much as possible, and then my gear pieces bumped it up even higher. Then I went with the second perk, and then the third perk, I went with 1 additional Lightning Strike. Then I put 1 point into Heart of the Wild, which then gives me access to these 2 other skills, which Wild Impulses. Your core skills cost 9% more spirit, but deal 15% increased damage. This is really important, because that buffs the crap out of your Lightning Storm. Then I just put 1 point into this where your basic skills generate 6% more spirit. Then I went down here, and I put 1 point into Predatory Instinct, and then I put 3 points into Digitigrade Gate. You gain 9% movement speed while in werewolf form, but because of our chest piece, we're always going to be in werewolf form at all times, giving us a permanent increase to our movement speed, which is really great for speed running some dungeons. Then coming down here to the defense tree, I put 1 point into Earthen Bulwark, and then I just put a second and third point just to give us a little bit more buffs. So I put 3 total points into this. And then going down a little bit further, I put 3 points here into Nature's Reach, dealing 9% increased damage to distant enemies. Double this bonus if they're also slowed, stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. So we're going to be doing a lot of ranged attacks in this build, and the 9% increased damage is going to make a big difference. So those are the only points I put into the companion tree. So next up, down here in the Wrath skills, I put all my points I could into Hurricane because Hurricane is extremely essential to this build. So I currently have it up to 7, where it does 16,000 to 20,000 damage over 8 seconds, which is insane. Then I went with the enemies affected by Hurricane deal 20% less damage. That way when they're up in my face, I can, survive a little bit longer. Then I put 1 point into Elemental Exposure, 1 point into Charged Atmosphere, which will unlock these 2. So that gives me 3 points into Electric Shock. Where dealing lightning damage to enemies has up to a 15% chance to immobilize them for 3 seconds. And then if they're immobilized, that's going to make them take even more damage from the other abilities in our build. Then I have 3 points into Bad Omen. Lucky hit up to a 30% chance when dealing damage to a vulnerable, immobilized, or stunned enemy that a lightning bolt also hits, dealing 4,000 to 5,000 damage, which is a lot of damage. Then down here at the bottom, I put 1 point into Neurotoxin, which makes poison enemies slower. Then I put 3 points into each down here because this is essential to this build. Poison enemies take 30% additional critical strike damage. And then this ability over here, critical strikes with werewolf skills deal 23% of their base damage as poisoning damage. And since our helmet makes our lightning skills count as werewolf skills, as you can see down here, it says core, storm, and werewolf. Since our lightning skills count as werewolf skills, every critical strike we get with lightning storm is going to count as werewolf damage, and then that is going to make them poisoned. So every time we get a critical with lightning, they will become poisoned, and then that stacks with this, where all of the poison enemies take an additional 30% critical strike damage. So we're essentially just turning our lightning strikes into poison strikes, which is just bonkers. Now real quick, I just wanted to remind you all that this video is sponsored by Blizzard and Diablo 4, so a big thank you to them for sponsoring today's video. Then down here, I have Defiance. Nature magic skills deal 12% increased damage to elites. That's pretty important. We have Natural Disaster. Your Earth skills deal 12% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and your Storm skills deal 12% increased damage to enemies that are stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. And then what's really important to this build is the Circle of Life. Nature magic skills that consume spirit heal you for 3% of your maximum life. So anytime we use any of our abilities, we're going to get 3% of our maximum life back, which is going to stack with one of the boons I'm going to show you, and it's just absolutely overpowered. Then obviously we go with Grizzly Rage because our build is based around Grizzly Rage and going into werewolf form. And since we have that one aspect on our weapon, Grizzly Rage is going to transform us into a dire werewolf instead of a dire bear. Then down here for the key passive, I went with the Lupin Ferocity because every 6th werewolf skill hit critically strikes, dealing 60% increased damage. And since all of the lightning abilities that we're going to be using count as werewolf, every 6th lightning strike is going to do 60% increased damage, which is just nuts. So that pretty much does it for the skill tree. Briefly going over the Paragon board, I went with the first glyph socket I went with was increased vulnerable damage, and I made sure to upgrade it so that the additional bonus is when an enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. This cannot happen more than every 20 seconds, so this glyph is super powerful. Then I just went with a bunch of damage bonuses. Then for the second tree, I went with the legendary node, the Thunderstruck node, and then I just upgraded all of the damage outputs: critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, critical strike. Storm skills deal 30% increased critical strike damage against vulnerable or immobilized enemies. And since every attack we do makes enemies vulnerable because of this glyph, we're going to be doing 30% increased critical strike damage on every single enemy that we attack. Then I just filled out the rest of the tree till I got up here, where I filled out Stormcaller, 20% storm skill damage. Then I filled out this one, bonus for another 4% damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. Then I went up here and I got the legendary node, the Heightened Malice. While there are 3 or more poison enemies nearby, you deal 45% increased damage. And since all of our lightning abilities count as poison damage, since they're werewolf abilities, all of the enemies are going to be poisoned, thus we're always going to be doing 45% increased damage. Then I just kind of filled out the rest of this tree, grabbing as many of these legendary nodes as I could. This one does 10% damage to poisoned enemies and 10% more poison damage. And then I'm working on buffing this up even more. Then this one over here does 10% damage to poison enemies. And then if you get the bonus, it's going to do another 10% damage to poison enemies. So the top tree is built on poison damage, which stacks really well with this one, which is all built on storm damage. And then obviously as I level up and I get closer to level 100, I'm going to focus on the werewolf tree next to focus on making my werewolf powers even stronger. Okay, so that does it for the gear and the abilities. Now let's go over the spirit boons really quick. First off, I went with awareness. I take 10% damage reduction from elites. For the second row, I went with the final one, gain 30% critical strike damage. This one is super important, always go with this one. For the third tree, I went with the extend the duration of ultimate skills by 25%, so this lets us stay in our ultimate form even longer, which lets us do even more damage. Then for the final tree, I went with the overload. Lucky hit dealing lightning damage has up to a 20% chance to cause the target to emit a static discharge, dealing 1600 to 1900 lightning damage to surrounding enemies, so that's just a good bonus to have to damage. And then I went with this one, which is super important because critical strikes with shape-shifting skills heal you for 3% of your maximum life. And since our Lightning Storm counts as a shape-shifting skill now, every time we hit something with Lightning Storm, it's going to heal us. And this boon right here, the one that heals you for 3% of your maximum life, actually stacks with the Circle of Life ability I was talking about, where nature magic skills that consume spirit heal you for 3% of your maximum life. These two abilities combined gives you just constant healing when you're dealing damage to enemies, pretty much making you invincible as long as you're facing enemies close to your level. Alright, so let's actually go out and see this build in action. I haven't fully tested this build just yet. I've been testing just bits and pieces, but now that I have every piece that I want combined, I feel like this is going to just be nuts. So, alright, let's go into the werewolf form, activate Hurricane, and then I can just stand here and just everything gets melted. So let's try to find a large group of enemies. Alright, perfect. So here's a large group of enemies. So we will just activate all of our stuff. And then I can just stand here and melt everything. Oh, okay. That I'm trying to showcase how good the build is, but everything's dying so fast. It's kind of hard to like test this because everything's dying so quickly. Okay, so yeah, I can just stand still, and because you know, the longer I stand still, if I don't move, that's going to give me that increase to damage. So see, damage increase while standing still, that keeps stacking every time you stand still for a couple seconds. And since we're using our lightning ability non-stop, and we're just standing still, I mean, that's going to make it really powerful. If we look down here, I'm currently at 11 out of 5, and I deal up to 9,000 damage. But if I buff myself with Hurricane, that puts up 13, now doing over 10,000 to 11,000 damage. All right, so I want to try to find a boss. All right, here's a strong enemy, so let's test this out. Okay, so he got obliterated. Never mind, I guess he wasn't that strong of an enemy. Alright, so I did some more testing, and this build is every bit as good as I thought it would be. It just absolutely wrecks things. With this build, I'm able to complete nightmare dungeons that are way outside of my level. The damage output on this build is so crazy, I can easily compete with enemies that are close to level 100, but this build will easily carry you from mid-game to late-game content. This build is great for speedrunning dungeons because of the additional movement speed, and in my opinion, I think this is one of the best builds you can have in the entire game for the Druid class. Like I said, it took me over a week of trial and error and practicing different combinations of the different skill aspects and stuff, but I'm really happy with the way that it turned out, and the only thing I can do to make this even stronger is to level up my character more, fill out the rest of my Paragon board, and then maybe find some better pieces of gear to just give me some overall better stats. But that is going to do it for this build guide / skill testing video. If you guys enjoyed it, then please give this video a thumbs up. It's greatly appreciated. And a huge thank you again to Blizzard and Diablo 4 for sponsoring today's video. And that is going to do it for me, guys, and I will talk to you all next time.